some philosophical bits and pieces of essays. There are many interesting historical researches going on today, and that have been in addition to cosmology that provide much information to consider for Christian philosophers and the thoughtful. I think that it is the case that some established church authorities have sought to freeze various structures in place because some contemporary dogmatics support the economic positions of the authorities, and that can lead to schisms and reform, such as that stimulating Protestants in the 1500s. I've learned more about the history of the first civilization over time in Sumer, southern Mesopotamia. Abraham was from the city of Ur. Sumer was established circa 5400 BC, so it was an old civilization by the time he got the call from God to Exodus around 2100 BC. That was a period when Sumer Akkad was in the final throes of its span and a good time for Abraham to leave. Abraham and family journeyed north through nearly to the Mediterranean and the west to Israel or Canaan. That region was between the two great early civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Learning that some of the information Abraham brought to Israel with him from Ur, where he probably worked as a scribe, has similar paradigmatic concurrence with ancient Sumerian data such as the flood during the end of the Wisconsin Ice Age, and should not be troubling to Christians. Instead, they should be thankful that Abraham brought the truth with him. If the universe is a simulation, that includes a paranormal construction of God paradigmatically. Philosophers might have trouble with cosmology, epistemology, and hermeneutics, that is, tying them together. Scientific American recently posted an article detailing a way to prove the universe or multiverse is a simulation. Using the speed of light as a limiting artifact of a simulation is an interesting and meaningful philosophical question. I don't know of many contemporary philosophers who can examine and compare the wealth of cosmology material, multiverse theory, simulation of the capacity God has to determine a priori the existence and order of all possible universes within his mind. Plotinus might have addressed such questions, as well as Augustine or Plato and Socrates. Proof that the universe is a simulation would work well as a proof that the universe was created in the mind of God or exists as a subroutine in one of his logically ordered thoughts. Predestination and a level 4 multiverse. Predestination is a difficult concept for many of the Christian faith. It implies that God has predetermined the entire universe and the role of people in it. Some of the secular have speculated that if the universe is entirely deterministic, no one is accountable for their actions, combined with rampant disbelief in God, that is accompanied with a belief in the non-existence of objective moral laws made by the Creator. There is a good explanatory video on the concept of predestination by R.C. Sproul, a good theology instructor who explains the Christian point of view. So I wanted to say that predestination seems almost necessary to me since God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. The created universe is comparable to a thought in the mind of God that he has had from start to finish and foreknows from eternity. In a way, one might infer that the perfection of God is thought of everything that ever would be thought from eternity with himself, for himself, and for others. Others learn what glimpses of data God wills them to experience when that was in his design for whatever purpose he has, and when the Holy Spirit and CEO, Jesus Christ, actualize. There is a physical account of an entirely predetermined multiverse. Well, I believe that every possible universe that could ever exist in time already exists in the mind of God. The physicist Max Tegmark made a cosmological explanation of the way the universe and multiverse may exist, already actualized. Every universe that could possibly exist does exist already, fully from the beginning and end of its history. I would like to interject a comment here concerning epistemology. I read something from Montaigne at some time that is similar to this paragraph that I constructed. With self-awareness, thought reflects itself, echoes itself with sentient distrust of self, certainty of knowledge and being. Belief may be a foundation content of knowledge self-awareness has. It is an original trust in the criterion of knowledge that does sometimes emerge as being wrong. Wrong beliefs may in some instances be synonymous with self. And I was thinking about Montaigne's statement that thought reflects itself, is sort of double, as possibly being a reason that Nietzsche, in his latter stages, seemed to have belief in recursion, or a deja vu kind of like experience that goes on forever. At any rate, to continue with the multiverse paradigm, Tegmark also wrote a book titled The Mathematical Universe that is still quite a good read, though a few years old. At the core, he speculates the universe and multiverse actually may be made of math. And that idea, again, is fine with me, since God is a pretty good mathematician himself, I would think. And math exists in mind rather than as physical objects. The entire multiverse may be actualized from alpha to omega, and it is just the minds of sentient beings that move through it that switch with every thought to the appropriate location and universe. That sounds very complex and improbable, perhaps, yet it may be that it actually is. The divine mechanics of God are likely to be more difficult to know for humans than quantum mechanics that are themselves challenging for non-scientists, non-physicists, majors, ordinary folks like myself. Many people have difficulty juggling the concept of Christian determinism and physical determinism, especially with the concept of quantum uncertainty thrown in, juxtaposed like a plank of space dimensions into time. The physical universe of energy, based on math or thought, is a healthful pre-existing condition. One should enjoy it rather than wait for the ordinary authorities of education to be clued in to the point of making it doctrine. And that reminds me briefly of something about photons as two-dimensional particles, which is particle waves, which is difficult to imagine. There was a lecturer in physics who mentioned that people tend to confuse time with space-time, or space with space-time, and they're different things. There is no gap, apparently, in time between one position of a photon and another position of the photon. So they have non-dimensional points, non-zero dimensional points. And of course, with special relativity, one knows that if one is a two-dimensional concept, a two-dimensional matrix, if one travels, say, on the x dimension as time, more very fast, and they travel less so on the y dimension and space, and vice versa. They're reciprocals, apparently, where if one travels at 60% of the speed of light, then one's time would be smaller, perhaps not 40% in space. Yet the thing was, and I'm confusing some of these concepts, the thing of interest to me was that a two-dimensional photon would only acquire the third dimension if it slowed down to sublight speed, and of course it wouldn't be a photon, and it's a wave, and it would slow down in the Higgs field. And all mass particles with mass, travel slower than the speed of light, and the Higgs field slows them down, so they appear to have a third dimension, so mass can seem to exist. And I was wondering how time could be, apparently it's relative, time is a measurement, the lecture said, between two events, rather than a thing in itself or for itself. And the entire idea of what energy actually is that forms the basis of particle waves was something I was thinking about. It would seem to have, I don't know, you could hide the dimensions. And I wonder about dimensions too, of photons. How can space be a dimension and time be a dimension? But what about the things for themselves, the energy of a photon? Does it have any actual size? If it's a wave, a particle wave, then it would apparently have no size, or an infinite size, however you like to say. But it does seem that it points to the idea that, along with quantum uncertainty, that there's some sort of a non-dimensional field, perhaps of no size at all, like a singularity, in which every bit of energy that could ever exist and every particle and particle wave does exist. And so when they're entangled, or like with uncertainty, it accounts for the actions of things that are mass, slower than subluminal velocity, slower than the speed of light, in the non-dimensional, I guess I could call it a matrix. I don't know. So it just is amazing to think that you might find solutions to some of the cosmological issues of quantum mechanics in considering that the entire universe is a singularity itself, presently, though it seems to have dimensions that mass exists in, like planets and galaxies and the appearance of space. But the dimensions need to be different than the mass itself, or than the energy itself. And the energy doesn't seem to need any... no one really knows what energy is. One can talk about energy and thermodynamics and the effects of energy, but what it actually is in itself, not a photon, not a quark or a muon, a particle or a particle wave, it is always something else, and it occurs in 1 or 2 or 3 dimensions. Yet the dimensions aren't the energy, and the energy in its size can't perhaps be actually energy is an action of something that one doesn't really know an action from itself. It's kind of like the paradox of thought that was mentioned of Montana's duplicity, a doubling, a reflection of itself, so it distrusts itself, was the essence of what Montana said. Montana. And so I'll get back to what I was going on about here. It's just some things that were of interest to me. Many people have difficulty juggling the idea of Christian determinism and physical determinism, especially with the concept of quantum uncertainty thrown in, juxtaposed like a plank of space dimensions into time. The physical universe of energy based on math or thought is a healthful pre-existing condition. One should enjoy it rather than wait for the ordinary authorities of education to be clued in to the point of making it doctrine. And then, ideas for an honest voting technology. Besides paper votes and hanging chads, the United States has a vast number of voting districts in different states. It has some inconsistencies in getting honest vote tallies that leave out issues of ambiguity concerning the veracity of the vote. What can be done to realistically restore the vote to reliability? In the modern era, some sort of electronic and analog vote technology probably will continue to be used to assure that each voter is the true legally registered voter. A face ID that can be electronically verified with a voter endorsement would need to go ahead. Once Real ID is everywhere in the 50 states, automatic registration of voters of age to vote should go ahead so a voter can vote without any other registration required. When going in to vote, the idea would be inserted in a machine that would issue a voter's number that would go print on the ballot. The voter would get a receipt with his or her vote number on it to keep and check out on the internet at a website listing every voter number that cast a vote. It would be hard to cast a fake vote or to throw out a vote, misunderstand a vote, or for any voter not to be able to vote. Republicans should have to worry about fake votes, not have to worry about fake votes, and Democrats shouldn't have trouble getting registered voters to make the vote. Some fabricate noble ends and goals to justify wicked means. Aren't the means in end justifies the mean scenarios ends for themselves? Since asking this question, I realized that some could use the end simply to justify the means. Means that are dubiously moral could be excused so far as PR goes if attached to some noble end such as creating utopia. Until the utopia or whatever is actualized, any sort of ruthless means could be justified or propped up with reference to the goal that it is the end. An example would be that means or ends methods A through B, means or methods A through B are wicked. Yet the noble and very important goal end number 5 is of great social importance. A plus B plus C plus D equal 5 is morally acceptable for those that believe the end justifies the means when it is true. However, and this is where one finds the problem of consequentialism, If a plus b plus c plus d is not equal to 5, or a plus b plus c plus d does not add up to produce goal end 5, it is immoral. I would guess that it is an example of consequentialism. Practically speaking, though, if one has a fine goal of such importance that it allows all manner of crime or political fascism as means to accomplish, then many people enjoying the luxury of superior felony edges over their fellow human beings might just make up noble ends to justify their crooked or evil means. Concerning the when of the collapse of the world, too many answers that are somewhat superfluous to choose from for an answer on the topic of when the world will collapse. The world could be compared to a souffle that is on the brink of collapse, yet it might be more like a lemon meringue pie with the frilly stuff actually somewhat solid or foamy in the better cases, and that could be compared to the inner earth with various levels of hot stone running through magma and deep within a nickel-iron core of chewy nougat for science fiction league extraterrestrial mole mining engines from deep space. One might prefer something more serious than the House of Cards kind of thing, though. There is apparently 3 times the water in the oceans, located 400 miles down in the Earth's transition zone. Not much danger of the plates floating over convection currents to deflate like an air mattress floating in the ocean, though. So one can move on from that. Scientists discover an ocean 400 feet beneath our feet that could 400 miles beneath our feet that could fill our oceans 3 times over. Extreme Tech article. If the world is entangled, massless particles in the Higgs field that have a relative third dimension because they slow to sublight speed in the viscous, cosmologically constant gooiness of the Higgs field, it might be compared to hand sanitizer gel. I suppose that the world and universe could collapse from 3 dimensions to 2 any second now. One can be certain or precise about that. Can't be certain or precise about that, obviously. Time is just an apparent quality of the 3-dimensional mass moving or jostling about in the Higgs field. Thus, for massless particles not trapped into being, mass-time may not exist. That brings up all kinds of questions, plainly, concerning what the Higgs field is for itself, and why does it have time at all? If time does not exist for zero-dimension points, believed to be the foundation of matter, when it is energy before it expands, what is energy before it expands, or something in one-dimension strings? How can they ever exist for a moment? If time does not exist for zero-dimension points of energy, that is something to consider as it pertains to the whenness of the collapse of the universe in the place called the firmament or stardust-clumped planet Earth. It might be better to consider the planetary economy and the voracious consumption of natural resources going on by the 8 billion people living in the world, and of it a collapse of the resource base and global economy could happen by the turn of the century or sooner through various kinds of military conflict or viral WMDs. Optimistically, though, the planet might return to some new general Christian ethics and try to repair the damages caused to the environment and to the poor and others living on Earth. Perhaps that is unlikely, yet it isn't impossible. It is possible that 20,000 scientists, technologists, engineers, and rich people could be living on Mars eventually, and that scientists may succeed in eliminating families from the planet and creating general atheistic morality and godlessness and reduce the population to a level acceptable for planetary continuity of human life, neo-human life, because I would think that at some point the rich people living on Mars would look at free human beings, even if they are queered up or feminized, as a danger to themselves. Although they help bring about, those people help bring about the domination of the rich and concentration of wealth in order to reduce the population. With very good sense and intelligence, that allows for better political ideas and social coordination. The people of the world might just squeak through hard times ahead in the next 2 centuries with new means of food production, in zero gravity, food growing bubbles, with potatoes the size of Manhattan or Rhode Island being grown like vast centrifugal planets in forests underground, dehydrated and sent to Earth, if special delivery packages that won't burn up in the atmosphere. Anything is possible, really. Otherwise, James Lovelock and Jacques Cousteau each said that humanity had about 200 or 300 years to go before the collapse of the bubble of human civilization. It's possible that if Mars is actually cool, doesn't have a hot core like the Earth does, that one could mine all the way through the planet, but certainly very deep without running into increased temperature, which stops Earth dwelling deep underground, because it just gets too hot. And so on Mars, they might be able to construct huge, vast chambers underground, grow food in, and things like that, create totally artificial environments with plants growing and light from fiber optics brought down to keep the plants alive. Defining the origin of the universe. There are lots of theories existing at any given time. Often they are disproven. Sometimes they convey an image of authority to the people that advocate the most popular theory, the Higgs field, and an inflaton that arises about simultaneously splitting off from an unstable field at time equals zero from a singularity is a popular theory. It's thought to have existed carefully balanced in a vacuum balanced between positive and negative energy. After the expansion of all that energy in the Higgs field and a win for matter over antimatter, canceling each other out, cancel culture, the original cancel culture, the subluminal mass of the universe continued along with gravity, stellar synthesis, and biological evolution. People tend to accept those general parameters as a valid theory of the origin of everything in this universe back to a singularity. Then there are meta-theories that have the initial energy before expansion as pure spirit, in the mind of God, as it were, with the expansion predetermined in accordance with his will. Some people have tossed blind random chance into a meta-theory to explain the existence of life and have postulated a profusion of universes existing in a universe along the lines of Everett's every possible universe paradigm that could exist, does exist principle. There is a good approach for a defining theory that allows for the universe to be in several forms with several explanations for its existence depending upon where one starts or orients the beginning. If mass and energy are at the most fundamental level, secondary phenomena of mathematical or spiritual construction made by a thinking being, or alternatively, is a superstring theory supporting the profusion of universes, or if the universes are something like a static field with mind switching between the appropriate universes, that corresponds to what the sentient primary being thinks, a phenomenon of mind, in a deterministic field with free will determining the destination of the traveler through the moral or soteriological facts, or when appeals to quantum simulation theory with the idea of origin coinciding with some sort of Schrodinger wave function collapse into self-awareness, the definition of the origin of the universe might appear equally valid to the sentient observer, even tested with some measure of falsifiability. Therefore, a definition of the origin of the universe these days tends to be a process. The genesis of being and nothingness has an in God, we trust element to it for those of us that regard an omniscient being and creator of every possible universe at some stage of the way in a logical point of purpose and utility, again, a process. Language itself is a process of associating words and objects, meanings and ideas with definitions and objects, each changing in the temporal field of common human experience. God, alternatively, is constant forever and before any temporal field that exists or manifests to observers. What people want for evidence of God. People are sometimes confused about reality and language in regard to naming points of cosmology, metaphysics, theology, and so forth. They have expectations about God and how he should be and expect categories of evidence, things evident, to appear to them. Generally, they have no training in formal logic. Nor in epistemology, and would like a God's to be on the corner with golden arches to offer bite-sized and tasty evidence for them for a reasonable price. With such great expectations, they're disappointed to find that franchise missing. It is as if a waiter is absent from the table in a French cafe described by Jean-Paul Sartre in being a nothingness. Some even believe the waiter needs to be God serving them up information, or that the waiter should have proof that he is God, like if he is a Christian having developed a Christ-like character through faith. There are some troubles with the paradigm of faith and predestination that make it difficult for those without any evident relationship in or faith concerning God to see any evident artifact of God, as if he left dinosaur fossils about the landscape, if they just dig a little deeper. One cannot see the origin of the Higgs field, so one has no certainty regarding its extent or if it was created or not by God, even indirectly. If It is as if every bit of the cosmos that exists, even theoretically, has just a middle and no beginning or end that is evident, nothing more than faith that isn't just a hologram or a deception by a wise guy superphysicist playing with the sentient beings inhabiting a universe he whipped up. A thickening plot, like a thickening of massless particles encountering the Higgs field, to slow down and become mass, so a contingent field of mass locked in a steady condition of particles can exist phenomenally, brings us to the problem of finding evidence for and evidence against the creator of the entire universe, uncertain phenomenal field in one-dimensional points that maybe were an uneven or fluctuating dimension of a vacuum between -1 and +1 with absolute zero energy, lacking energy to stay balanced. Perhaps some sort of space manifold shifted, and the space at the beginning, at the singularity, the energy was released simply by a slip-strike fault of space-time dimensions. It is as if the plot of infinite series of quantum points fluctuating between all possible locations in an infinite number of theoretical dimensions was just a figment of the imagination of a lizard sunning itself on a rock rather than God who could set values to agitation, quantum jitters, thinking about it. Some people just demand answers. They cannot get reading the Bible and natural history, probably because they don't read it well enough, and consider how an eternal God might have described some of his work to rather primitive people that believe they are terribly smart at any given time since they climbed down from the trees, or at least their ancestors did. A plot with evidence for versus evidence against requires a start, an argument, maybe stimulated by Darwin's origin of species set with proximal causes and pieces of proofs concerning modal universe and the philosophy of logic, showing that the beginning and end of time are just arbitrary places to start in the temporal middle of nowhere, theoretically speaking, with the relativity of space-time and the combined Higgs field phenomenality of subluminal quarks and forces of gravity, massless particles set above and apart from mass being apparent primary secondary effects of an unknown primary sponsor or agent of the Higgs sublight show. If the Bible is a process of understanding and correlating knowledge, those without evidence lack the content, wherein with faith they might discover evidence or at least understand meaning in a deeper sense. It does save time, though, to make summary, though error-prone judgments about things. It may be that those that were predetermined to salvation encounter evidence and those that weren't don't. It might be necessary to think on such things for a while to develop an informed opinion, yet McDonald's calls. Thickened Higgs field, interactive content, stellar synthesis, melted and cooled magma with some expect to find evidence of God in such structures, like clever little messages written with advanced theoretical physics tools on the spin states of subatomic particles, or maybe on clay tablets from an alien civilization that encountered God with faster-than-light starships that maybe made it through to an alternate universe. I think that if one considers the Bible deeply, one can not only form a good opinion on eschatology, so they know the difference between premillennialism, postmillennialism, and amillennialism, they can form better ideas about the creation in the scriptural paradigm in regard to all times and periods of human knowledge, so people of each era might understand it, and that God created the universe. Whatever mankind finds that is true about cosmology, it is not in contradiction with the information imparted in Genesis. Natural history is not in conflict with Scripture. It confirms it paradigmatically. God has not set any sort of deceits between the natural history of the universe and the content of Genesis. The problem is in human understanding of either. One can get beyond Pascal's wager or James's pragmatic reasons for belief and know that anything that exists does have at least half a chance of being created by someone. I wrote an ebook that is free to download that has some of my efforts to clarify the topic. It was put together some years ago before the Higgs field knowledge became too familiar, and there are always new things to learn about biblical, archaeological, and natural history that should go into another edition of God, Cosmology, and Nothingness. That's the title of my ebook.